Good evening. I am Dr. Harmeet Singh, organizing chairman of this trauma series 2021. Today with us we have Dr. Shakti, who is the attending consultant at Max Hospital, Vaishali in the Department of Emergency Medicine. So I request Dr. Shakti to proceed with his presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Amit sir, and greetings for the day, everyone. I'm Dr. Shakti Shishodia, attending consultant in the Department of Emergency, Max Super Specialty Hospital, Vaishali. And let's continue with the trauma series. And I'll be presenting the topic of upper limb. So let's start with the presentation. Okay, so upper limb is a very vast topic. So I'll try and cover the major topics involved. Okay, so let's start. So in this presentation, we'll be talking about the clavicle, humerus, forearm, radius, shoulder, and elbow. Okay, so coming to the clavicle, let's go start with the anatomy. The clavicle or the collarbone extends between the manubrium of the sternum and the acromion of the scapula. It is classified as a long bone and can be palpated along its length. In thin individuals, it is visible under the skin. The clavicle has major three functions. First, it attaches the upper limb to the trunk as a part of the shoulder girdle, protects the underlying neurovascular structure supplying the upper limb, transmit force from the upper limb to the axial structure. Bony landmarks and articulation. The clavicle is a slender bone with an S shape facing forward. The medial aspect is convex and the lateral aspect is concave. It can be divided into sternal end, a shaft, and an acromial end. Sternal or the medial end. The sternal end contains a large facet for articulation with the manubrium of the sternum at the sternoclavicular joint. The inferior surface of the sternal end is marked by a rough oval depression for the costoclavicular ligament, a ligament of the SC joint. Coming to the shaft of the clavicle acts as a point of origin and attachment for several muscles. Deltoid, trapezius, subclavius, pectoralis major, sternocleidomastoid, and sternohyoid. The acromial end houses a small facet for articulation with the acromion of the scapula at the acromioclavicular joint. It also serves as an attachment point for two ligaments. Conoid tubercle, attachment point of the conoid ligament, the medial part of the coracoclavicular ligament. Trapezoid line, attachment point of the trapezoid ligament, the lateral part of the coracoclavicular ligament. Okay, so coming to the mechanism of injury, 87% falls is due to fall onto the shoulder, 7% is because of the direct blow, and 6% is fall onto the outstretched hand. Okay, so first we need to evaluate the patient first, right? First comes your inspection, then comes your neurovascular assessment, distal neurovascular exam. In this, you have to look for 5 P's: pain, pulse, pallor, paresthesia, and paralysis. If the patient is having some sort of pain or not, are the distal pulses present or not? You have to look for the pallor. If it is looking like whitish or not, paresthesia, can they feel when if you are examining the part, and are they able to move the leg or not, or the upper limb or not? Okay, so you have to auscultate the chest for possibility of lung injury or a pneumothorax in all the clavicular injury patient. Radiographic exam, shoulder AP view. Okay, so is the Allman classification. Type 1 is the middle third of the clavicle, which is 80%. Type 2 is the distal third, which is 15%. Type 3 is the medial third, which is the 5%. Treatment is close sling application. Immobilization for usually 3 to 4 weeks with early range of motion is encouraged. Operative measure: fractures with the neurovascular injury, fractures with severe associated chest injuries, open fractures, generally type 2 fractures in the Allman classification, and maybe the patients who with the cosmetic reason, uncontrolled deformity, non-union are the ones which fall under the operative interventions. Okay, coming to the humerus. So The humerus is a long bone of upper limb which extends from the shoulder to the elbow. Let's talk about the anatomy first. The proximal aspect of the humerus articulates with the glenoid fossa of the scapula, forming the glenohumeral joint. Distally at the elbow joint, the humerus articulates with the head of the radius and the trochlear notch of the ulna. The proximal humerus is marked by head, anatomical neck, surgical neck, greater and lesser tuberosity, and the intertubercular sulcus. The upper end of the humerus consists of the head. This faces medially upwards and backwards and is separated from the greater and the lesser tuberosities by the anatomical neck. The greater tuberosity is located laterally on the humerus and has anterior and posterior surfaces. It serves as an attachment site for three of the rotator cuff muscles: supraspinatus, infraspinatus, and teres minor. They attach to the superior, medial, and inferior facets on the greater tuberosity. The lesser tuberosity is much smaller and more medially located on the bone. It only has an anterior surface. It provides attachment for the last rotator cuff muscle, the subscapularis. Separating the two tuberosities is a deep groove known as the intertubercular sulcus. The tendon of the long head of the biceps brachia emerges from the shoulder joint and runs through this groove. The edges of the intertubercular sulcus are known as the lips. Pectoralis major, teres major, and latissimus dorsi insert on the lips of the intertubercular sulcus. This can be remembered with the mnemonic, a lady between two majors, with latissimus dorsi attaching between the teres major on the medial lip and pectoralis major laterally. The surgical neck extends from just distal to the tuberosities to the shaft of the humerus. The axillary nerve and the circumflex humeral vessels lie against the bone here. The shaft of the humerus is the site of attachment for various muscles. Cross-section views reveal it to be circular proximal and flattened distally. On the lateral side of the humeral shaft is a roughened surface where the deltoid muscle attaches. This is known as the deltoid tuberosity. The radial or the spiral groove is a shallow depression that runs diagonally down the posterior surface of the humerus parallel to the deltoid tuberosity. The radial nerve and the profunda brachii artery lie in this groove. The muscles attached to the humerus along its shaft are the anteriorly is coracobrachialis, deltoid brachialis, brachioradialis, posteriorly medial and lateral heads of the triceps. The spiral groove demarcates their respective origins. Coming to the distal region, the lateral and the medial border of the distal humerus form medial and lateral supraepicondylar ridges. The lateral supraepicondylar ridge is more roughened, providing the site of common origin of the forearm extensor muscles. Immediately distal to the supraepicondylar ridge are the extracapsular projections of the bone, the lateral and the medial epicondyle. Both can be palpated at the elbow. The medial is the larger of the two and extends more distally. The ulnar passes in a groove on the posterior aspect of the medial epicondyle with where it is palpable. Distally, the trochlea is located medially and extends onto the posterior aspect of the bone. Lateral to the trochlea is the capitulum, which articulates with the radius. Also located on the distal portion of the humerus are the three depressions known as the coronoid, radial, and olecranon fossa. They accommodate the forearm bones during flexion or extension of the elbow. Coming to the articulations, the proximal region of the humerus articulates with the glenoid fossa of the scapula to form the glenohumeral joint, which is a shoulder joint. Distally at the elbow joint, the capitulum of the humerus articulates with the head of the radius, and the trochlea of the humerus articulates with the trochlear notch of the ulna. Okay, so it is most commonly seen in the elder patients, and it accounts for 4 to 5% of all the fractures. Mechanisms of injury, most commonly a fall onto an outstretched arm for a standing height. Younger patients typically present with high energy trauma, such as the motor vehicle accidents. Okay, coming to the clinical features. First is the pain and the loss of function. Swelling are the most common symptoms on the initial presentation, and paresthesia or weakness, axillary or brachial plexus injury are the most common clinical features. Coming to the knees classification. Okay, so it is divided into 4 parts, 1, 2, 3, and 4. So coming to the part 1, it is the surgical neck or the anatomical neck, lesser tuberosity or the greater tuberosity are generally the ones involved. Any fracture with less than 1 centimeter of displacement comes under part 1. When the surgical neck, anatomical neck, lesser tuberosity or greater tuberosity are involved and the fragment must be displaced by 1 centimeter, comes under the part 2. When the surgical neck and greater tuberosity or surgical neck and lesser tuberosity and the fragment must be displaced by 1 centimeter, it comes under the part 3. Surgical neck, lesser and greater tuberosities with the fragment must be displaced by 1 centimeter, comes under part 4. Coming to the management, conservative management are for the undisplaced fracture, mobilized in a plaster slab, encourage active exercise after 1 to 2 weeks, healing and usually usually after 6 weeks. Operative measures are generally for the displaced fracture, and that we have to go for ORIF, which is open reduction internal fixation. Prosthetic replacement of the proximal humerus is required. Coming to the shaft of the humerus. So the fracture pattern depends on the stress applied. So it is compressive, which is the proximal, the distal humerus. Bending, the transverse fracture of the shaft. Then comes your torsional, which is the spiral fracture of the shaft. And then comes your torsion and the bending, which is the oblique fracture usually associated with the butterfly fragment. Okay, coming to the evaluation. Thorough history and physical examination is required in these patients. Pain, swelling, and deformity of the upper arm is the most common thing which is present on the initial examination, and careful neurovascular examination is important because as the radial nerve is in the close proximity to the humerus and can be injured. So these patients should be evaluated properly. So Hosen-Lewis fracture is the spiral fracture of the distal 1/3 of the humerus shaft, 22% incidence associated with neuropraxia of the radial nerve. As you can see on the left side of your screen, the image shown. Okay, coming to the forearm. So first we'll start with the anatomy. So the radius is a long bone in the forearm, and it lies laterally and parallel to the ulna, the second of the forearm bone. And the radius pivot around the ulna to produce a movement at the proximal and the distal radio-ulnar joints. The radius articulates in 4 places. First is the elbow joint, partly formed by articulation between the head of the radius and the capitulum of the humerus. Second is your proximal radial-ulnar joint and articulation between the radial head and the radial notch of the ulna. Third is your wrist joint and articulation between the distal end of the radius and the carpal bones. Distal radio-ulnar joint and articulation between the ulnar notch and the head of the ulna. Proximal region of the radius articulates in both elbow and proximal radio-ulnar joints. Important bony landmarks include the head, neck, and radial tuberosity. Head of the radius, a disc-shaped structure with a concave articulating surface. It is thicker medially, where it takes part in the proximal radio-ulnar joint. Neck, a narrow area of bone which lies between the radial head and the radial tuberosity. Radial tuberosity, a bony projection which serves as a place of attachment of the biceps brachii muscle. Shaft of the radius. The radial shaft expands in a diameter as it moves distally, much like ulna. It is triangular in shape with 3 borders and 3 surfaces. In the middle of the lateral surface, there is a small roughening for the attachment of pronator teres muscle. Distal regions of the radius. In the distal region, the radial shaft expands to form a rectangular end. The lateral side projects distally as the styloid process. In the medial surface, there is concavity called the ulnar notch, which articulates with the head of ulna. forming the radioulnar joint. The distal surface of the radius has two facets for articulation with the scaphoid and lunate carpal bones. This makes up the wrist joint. The ulna is the long bone in the forearm, and it lies medially and parallel to the radius, the second of the forearm bone. The ulna acts as a stabilizing bone with the radius pivoting to produce the movement. Proximally, the ulna articulates with the humerus at the elbow joint. Distally, the ulna articulates with the radius, forming the distal radioulnar joint. The proximal end of the ulna articulates with the trochlea of the humerus. To enable movement at the elbow joint, the ulna has a specialized structure with a bony prominence for muscle attachment. Important landmarks of proximal ulna are olecranon, coronoid process, trochlear notch, radial notch, and the tuberosity of the ulna. Olecranon, a large projection of the bone that extends proximally, forming a part of the trochlear notch. It can be palpated at the tip of the elbow. The triceps brachii muscle attaches to its superior surface. Coming to the coronoid process, this ridge of bone projects outwards anteriorly, forming a part of the trochlear notch. Coming to the trochlear notch, it is formed by the olecranon and the coronoid process. It is wedge-shaped and articulates with the trochlea of the humerus. Radial notch, it is located on the lateral surface of the trochlear notch. This articulates with the head of the radius. The tuberosity of ulna, roughening immediate distal to the coronoid process. It is where the brachialis muscle attaches. Coming to the shaft of the ulnar shaft is a triangular in shape with three borders and three surfaces. As it moves distally, it decreases its width. The three surfaces are the anterior, posterior, and the medial. Anterior, it is the site of attachment for the pronator quadratus muscle distally. Posteriorly, site of attachment for many muscles, and medially, it is unremarkable. The three borders are the posterior, which is palpable along the entire length of forearm posteriorly. Interosseous, site of attachment for the interosseous membrane, which spans the distance between the two forearm bones. Anterior, it's unremarkable. So, coming to the epidemiology, the highest ratio of open to closed than any other fracture except the tibia, and more common in males than females, most likely secondary to motor vehicle accidents, contact sports, and fall. Coming to the clinical evaluation, patient typically presents with gross deformity of the forearm and with pain, swelling, and loss of function at the hand. Careful exam is essential with specific assessment of radial, ulnar, and medial nerves and radial and ulnar pulses. Tense compartments and remitting pain and pain with passive motion should raise suspicions for compartment syndrome. Okay, so there is a mnemonic to remember between the Monteggia and the Galeazzi fracture is MUGGER. MU is the Monteggia. So the ulnar fracture with dislocation of radial head is Monteggia fracture. And so A is in Monteggia, A is the proximally bones affected proximally. So this can be used as a mnemonic to learn. In Galeazzi, radius fracture with dislocation of the distal radioulnar joint, GR. So Z is distal, bones affected are distally. So looking at the description, in Monteggia, anterior dislocation of the radial head with a fracture of ulna usually is angulated dorsally. In Galeazzi, it is a fracture of the radius with shortening and dislocation of the distal end. Radius is dislocation is at the head in Monteggia, and in Galeazzi, it is the isolated fracture at the junction of the distal and the middle third. In cases of ulna, fracture of the middle proximal third is Monteggia, and subluxation or dislocation of the distal radioulnar joint. Mechanism is almost similar in both the things. Fall on the outstretched hand with the forearm in extensive pronation, and direct blow on the back of upper forearm in self-defense, which is nystagmus injury in Monteggia, and in Galeazzi it is fall on an outstretched arm with an elbow flex. Management is open reduction and internal fixation in Montesia, and in Galicia it is open reduction in adults and closed reduction in children. Complications are generally similar: non-union and limitation of motion at the elbow, right? And these are the names of the people who actually coined the term. Clinical evaluation. It is generally present with the gross deformity of the wrist with variable displacement of the hand in relation to the wrist, typically swollen with the painful range of motion. Oscillator shoulder and elbow must be examined. Neurovascular exam, including specifically for median nerve for acute carpal tunnel compression syndrome. Okay, coming to the Colles fracture, it is the combination of intra and extra articular fractures of the distal radius with dorsal angulation, apex volar, dorsal displacement, radial shift, and radial shortening. Most common distal radius fracture caused by an fall on an outstretched hand. As you can see on your left side of your there's a picture of Colles fracture outwards, right? And then comes your Smith fracture, which is the reverse of Colles fracture with volar angulation, apex dorsal from a fall on a flexed hand inward, right? Okay, Barton fracture with dorsal or volar rim displaced with the hand and the carpus. As you can see on the image, you can see there's a radius, there's a fracture, right? So this is a Barton's fracture. Radius styloid fracture or the Schoffer's fracture, a virgin fracture with extrinsic ligament attached to the fragment. Mechanism of injury is compression of scaphoid against the styloid. Imaging depicted the Schoffer's fracture. Coming to treatment, displaced fractures require an attempt at the reduction. Hematoma block, 10 cc's of lidocaine in the fracture site. Hang the wrist in the finger strap with a traction weight. Reproduce the fracture mechanism and try and reduce the fracture. Operative measures for the patients with the interarticular unstable and mal-reduced fractures. As always, open fractures must go to the OR. Coming to the shoulder. So shoulder joint, let's talk about anatomy first. The shoulder joint is a ball and socket joint between the scapula and the humerus. It is the major joint connecting the upper limb to the trunk. It is one of the most mobile joints in the human body at the cost of joint stability. So the articulating surfaces, the shoulder joint is formed by the articulation of the head of the humerus with the glenoid cavity or the scapula. This gives rise to the alternate name for the shoulder joint, which is the glenohumeral joint. Like most synovial joints, the articulating surfaces are covered with the hyaline cartilage. The head of the humerus is much larger than the glenoid fossa, giving the joint a wide range of motion at the cost of inherent instability. To reduce the disproportion in surface, the glenoid fossa is deepened by the fibrocartilage rim called the glenoid labrum. Joint capsules and the bursa. The joint capsule is the fibrous sheet which encloses the structure of the joint and extends from the anatomical neck of the humerus to the border or the rim of the glenoid fossa. The joint capsule is lax, permitting greater mobility. The synovial membrane lines the inner surface of the joint capsule and produces synovial fluid to reduce the friction between the articular surfaces. To reduce friction in the shoulder joint, several synovial bursas are present. A bursa is a synovial fluid sac which acts as a cushion between tendon and other joint structures. The bursa that are important clinically are the subacromial, subcapsular. So the subacromial is located deep to the deltoid and acromion, and the superficial to the supraspinatus tendon and joint capsule. The subacromial bursa reduces a friction beneath the deltoid, promoting free motion of the rotator cuff tendon. Subacromial bursitis, that is the inflammation of the bursa, can be a cause of a shoulder pain. Subcapsular, located between the subscapularis tendon and the scapula, it reduces wear and tear on the tendon during the movement of the shoulder. There are other minor bursas present between the tendons of the muscle around the joint, but this is beyond the scope of this presentation and we won't be discussing much about that. Coming to the ligaments, in the shoulder joint, the ligament play a key role in stabilizing the joint's bony structure. First is the glenohumeral joint, which is superior, middle, and inferior. The joint capsule is formed by this group of ligament connecting the humerus to the glenoid fossa. They are main source of stability for the shoulder, holding it in place and preventing it from dislocating anteriorly. They act to stabilize the anterior aspect of the joint. Coracohumeral ligament attaches the base of the coracoid process to the greater tubercle of the humerus. It supports the superior part of the joint. Transverse humeral ligament spans the distance between the two tubercles of the humerus. It holds the tendon of the long head of bicep in the intertubercular groove. Coracoclavicular joint, it is composed of the trapezoid and the conoid ligaments and runs from the clavicle to the choroid process of the scapula. They work alongside the acromioclavicular ligament to maintain the alignment of the clavicle in relation to the scapula. They have significant strength, but large forces, for example, after a high energy fall, can rupture these ligaments as a part of an acromioclavicular joint (ACJ) injury. In severe ACJ injury, the coracoclavicular joints may require surgical repair as well. So the movement, as it is a ball and socket synovial joint, there is a wide range of movement permitted. There are multiple movements like extension, flexion, abduction, adduction, internal rotation, external rotation, circumduction, right? So there are multiple joint movements for these joints. So the major innovation is provided by the axillary, suprascapular, and lateral pectoral nerves, right? So anterior shoulder dislocation, it is the most common one. Posterior one, it is uncommon. Around 10% of the patients present with these injuries. And in these patients, we should think about electrocutions or seizure-like activity. Inferior, it is very rare, and it is hyperabduction in cases of hyperabduction injury only. Coming to the examination, we have to examine the axillary nerve for the deltoid function, sensations over the lateral shoulder. Examine the bicep function and anterolateral forearm sensation. Coming to the radiographic evaluation, for these patients, we should get an X-ray of true AP shoulder, axillary nerve, scapular Y, striker, notch view, bony, banker. Recurrence rate in the age of 20, it is 80 to 92% of the recurrence rate. In age of 30, it is around 60%. Age 40, it is 10 to 15%. We should be looking for the concomitant injuries, bony, glenoid fractures, greater tuberosity fractures, soft tissues in the subscapularis tier, as mentioned earlier. In vascular axillary artery injury, especially older patients with atherosclerosis, and nerve, axillary nerve, which leads to the neuropexia. Okay, so posterior shoulder dislocation. Look for the light bulb sign and the vacant glenoid sign, as it can be seen on the screen, the picture shown, right? So this is a light bulb sign. So inferior dislocation, it is hyperabduction injury, arms present enough legs, asking a question posture, high rate of nerve and vascular injuries. Coming to the treatment, first is your Kocher's method, most commonly used. First, you give the traction with external rotation, then comes your abduction and your internal rotation. Second is your Stimson technique. Patient is supine, affected arm hanging down over the edge, and weights are being applied to the wrist and wait for relaxation and auto reduction. This is traction counter traction method. Sheet wrapped around the patient and one wrapped around the reducer, and we pull the sheet and the arm, and we try to reduce the shoulder. Is a Milchman maneuver, and patient supine. It is steady downward traction applied at the elbow, combined with slow, gradual, and external rotation and abduction of the limb, as you can see in the picture. Okay, coming to the elbow. So So mechanism of injury, it is most commonly due to fall on ostrich hand or elbow resulting in force to unlock the olecranon from the trochlea. The posterior dislocation following hyperextension, valgus stress, arm abduction, and forearm supination. So anterior dislocation ensuring from the direct force to the posterior forearm with elbow flexed. Okay. Coming to the clinical evaluation, patient will present with guarding the injured extremity, gross deformity, and the swelling. Careful neurovascular exam is important and should be done prior to the radiographs or manipulation, and repeat the X-rays after the reduction. Right? Radiographic evaluation, AP and the lateral elbow film should be obtained before pre and post reduction. Careful examination for associated fractures. Coming to the treatment, in cases of posterior dislocation, close reduction under sedation. Reduction should be performed with the elbow flexed while providing the distal traction. Post-reduction management include a posterior splint with the elbow at the 90 degrees. In cases of anterior dislocation, close reduction under sedation again, and distal traction to the flexed forearm, followed by dorsally direct pressures on the volar forearm with anterior pressure on the humerus. So this is the Mason's classification. Basically, in elbow dislocation, we have to evaluate. We have to see for associated injuries, and we have to look for the radial head. So there are 4 types. So type 1 is non-displaced radial head fracture, also known as the chisel fracture. And type 2, it is the partial articular fractures with displacement of more than 2 mm. Type 3 is divided into subclass, divided into further 3 parts, 3A, B, and C. So type 3 is the cumulative fracture involving the entire radial head. 3A is fracture of the entire radial neck with the head and completely displaced from the shaft. 3B is articular fracture involving the entire head consisting of more than 2 large ligaments. Type 3C is a fracture with the titled and impacted articular segment. Okay, coming to the type 4, fracture of radial head with dislocation of the elbow joint. So this is a sheet. You guys can later on can pause it up and take a screenshot of it. This is nerve examination for all the for the patients who actually undergo upper limb trauma. So brachial plexus injury can be evaluated through this chart. You guys can go through it later on, right? And thank you. That's it from my side. Yeah.